I'm Carly Kramer. I'm the founder of Beekeepers Naturals, and this is the science of fertility. Let's get into it. This is an episode I'm really excited about because with pregnancy, it is so much pressure on the person carrying the child and birthing the child.
Right.
And when we've talked about this endlessly, but when you dig into the research, very little research on men.
Right.
On sperm, and these things obviously, intuitively, these things play a role, but for whatever reason, we live in a society where
it's on the woman.
Yeah, totally overlooked on the woman. Like fertility is the biggest issue and no studies when it comes to men. And it's crazy because
they're getting there.
Sure.
But it's not enough. Mm-hmm. I totally agree.
But it's crazy because there are so many things that the partner can do to support fertility, to support a healthy pregnancy, to impact the future child. Mm-hmm. So this needs to be discussed. This is an episode I'm so excited about.
Me too. And it's interesting when we were talking about, just planning through what we wanted to touch on, and we were talking about the role for male factor fertility or infertility. Yep. And I was like, I'm just going to see what's out there. And I was upset that even in podcast world articles, it's hard to find good information that you can turn to and be like, okay, what's the tried and true? What's actually science backed? What matters? What do they need to avoid? All of those things. A lot of noise out there, but this is the one area where men are not getting enough attention, and we don't say that very often, but this is the one area that they are not getting enough attention. Yeah. And as we talked about in one of our earlier episodes, they can be, for infertility reasons, which again, we don't love that term, but they can be 40% of the time they're the problem.
Huge.
Men, you are the problem sometimes. Sometimes it's you. Sometimes it's us, sometimes it's both.
So let's start with the things I need to avoid because these things are not always obvious.
Right.
And I know with my partner, there was huge heartbreak around taking a single day away from the sauna or the 4-hour bike ride.
Yes.
So we've worked through it.
We've already worked through it, as have we. Mm-hmm. So one of the big things that I don't think we're talking about enough is the impact that heat has on the process called spermatogenesis, so the production of sperm. And this is super interesting to me. So there was, albeit a small study, but there was a study of 11 infertile men that were looked at. They were all using a hot tub on average for at least 30 minutes a week. Mm-hmm. Some do that daily. All they were asked to do was to stop using the sauna because most of them had very low or almost zero sperm count.
So wait, this is just 30 minutes a week?
This was just 30 minutes a week.
So this is once a week, not long, in a hot tub. Okay.
Yes. And that amount alone was enough to have such a negative impact on their sperm health that when they stopped doing so for 3 months, the men that recovered, which was nearly half in this study, had an over 500% increase in the total motile sperm. So not just the sperm itself, but the sperm that we want to see, the stuff that's actually moving and that could make its way to the egg and could fertilize the egg. It has a huge impact. And for many individuals, couples, hot tubbing, saunas, cold plunges, totally
hot bath.
Yes, all wonderful things and can be great. But the testes are held outside of the body intentionally. There's a muscle called the cremaster muscle that kind of encases them, that can kind of help bring them closer to or further away from the body, temperature dependent. They're outside so that they're at least a degree cooler than the rest of the body, and that's kind of their sweet spot. Yep. And so when you're, lack of a better word, baking them in a hot tub or a sauna.
And you're baking the balls.
You were baking the balls and you were killing the sperm.
Okay, so I live in LA. It's a big wellness culture, big sauna culture.
Yeah.
I feel like so many of my friends' partners, they're saunaing every day and they're like, okay, what if I take it down to once a week or something like that?
And that's
doesn't work though.
For some, potentially, but the research study was small, but it still, for me, it showed how significant even that once a week could be. There was another study that looked, and something about the wet heat that tends to be a little bit potentially more potent, if you will, because there was a dry sauna study that was over just shy of 2.5 hours a week, but had similar effects and impacts. Again, with most of these, the recovery does happen when we take a break from that heat exposure.
But that recovery has to be like 3 months, according to the studies?
And the reason for that is because that's how long it takes to actually create sperm. And I don't think men know that. I think in their minds, they're like, every day, millions are out. We're ready. Like, we're so ready. And like the math kind of works out that way. But the reason it does is because the process started really 2.5, 3 months ago. So the process is called spermatogenesis, production of sperm. So initially they're created and called the seminiferous tubules, just little tubules in the testes. That's where they're first created. That takes about 60 days for that creation process. They're then moved to the epididymis. I like to think of it, epididymis as like a little backpack on the back of the testes. It just sits there. That's where they go.
Sounds like a Greek god.
Don't tell them that.
I know. It's like, why is that the name? And then we have like fallopian tubes.
I know. We don't get the cool stuff. They do. We get fimbriae and fallopian tubes.
Fimbriae
and
the
ampulla of. Anyway, I agree.
That one sucks.
Yeah, that one.
I don't even know that one.
That's where fertilization occurs. There you go. Anywho, so the epididymis is where the sperm go to mature. That process can take 2 weeks. So we're roughly, again, at a 2.5, 3 month process now for us to get good, healthy sperm production. And so that's why if we're doing something that could be negatively impacting sperm, we need at least 3 months away from it. And that's also why we're here and talking about it, because I don't think people know that. And I didn't prior
because
to medical school.
There are probably people trying to get pregnant right now, and their partners are big sauna or hot tubbers or bath takers. And it might be affecting their process.
I had a wonderful friend who, while he was in college, intentionally used a hot tub for said purposes. And bless his heart. And they have actually looked into using heat for men for birth control
Male birth control. So just hit the sauna, guys.
They haven't further pursued that. Obviously not like an FDA approved thing to do. But regardless, just to show the negative impact it can have on sperm production. So something not to do is this is the time that we take a break from the saunas, the hot tubs, those sorts of things. Cold plunge, sure, but the heat we really need to take a break from. And this also applies for men who are unfortunately in industries where they're exposed to a lot of heat. So there's studies actually on chefs who are working at the cook line and that heat being kind of, depending on their height, but that being kind of at the perfect area where they're just getting blasted by heat. They actually make some special aprons now that will provide some extra protection, which is really neat. And same thing with like radiation. A cock blocking apron, a heat cock blocking apron. There's nothing more you could ask for. So again, just something to consider that I don't think people knew about. And then the cycling comes in too, where and
is the cycling, is that because of heat? Is that the pressure of the balls on the seat?
We don't know exactly right now. I think it's really a mix of the both. Likely heat because, yes, they're generally in their spandex. They're being forced close to the body, even if they're wanting to be further away. And then also just the mechanical, physical impact of cycling. I don't know a man out there, and God bless everyone that does the Tour de France, is like so thrilled with the position that their junk is in while they're on the bike for that long. So not a comfy process.
Well, we tested this when I started my fertility journey. We tested my partner's sperm, and he's a heavy cycler, as is yours. And at the time that he was heavy cycling, he had low motility. And then we cut out cycling, and we were all good.
And things had an impact. So for both of our partners during the trying process, it's a no. So no bike zone.
So Danny is not sauning, not biking. He's on lockdown.
He's on lockdown. You can go to the gym. You can run. Ideally, though, maybe still not super long. This is 3 months,
though, so it's like, I don't want to hear it. It's nothing.
This is your part of the equation, 3 months, and it's important. And why it's important is if we're impacting the sperm production process and the maturation process, we're having a significant impact on not just the health of baby, but the health of pregnancy too. And I don't think people make that link. So it's
what does that mean, the health of pregnancy? Like likelihood of carrying?
So can be as simple as it can increase the risk of miscarriage rates. So the sperm not being healthy, the DNA not being healthy in the sperm can increase or be a reason for frequent miscarriages. So again, that's where the male factor comes in. The other piece too is that during pregnancy, it can increase risks of things like preeclampsia. That's where we have a kind of life-threatening condition where blood pressure can get so high for the woman that they're oftentimes put on bed rest. If possible, they will be asked or forced to deliver early. And a part of that can be from the sperm not being healthy when conception occurred, which is really true, or fertilization occurred, which is super interesting.
What else? So we've got heat. What else do we want to avoid?
So the heat, the cycling, other toxins, when we think of things like alcohol, this is a big time that we need to be super mindful of alcohol intake.
So 3 months before alcohol intake. Okay.
Yes.
So that's another thing. Like I feel like I see couples where there's a lot of heavy drinking prior.
Sure, totally.
Yeah, I mean, for the woman, maybe as she's trying to conceive, you're waiting for that test, you're not sure. But men are like not reeling it in at all here, at least that I've seen.
And I think that's just because they don't know that it could have an impact. And where that plays a role is the alcohol. It is a toxin to our system. It's enjoyable for some, like all of the things, yes, but it's ultimately broken down as a toxin in our body. And it being a toxin can increase inflammation in our system, can increase risk of other metabolic diseases, which can further increase inflammation, which can then impact, again, the process of sperm production and maturation. So it's kind of like this snowball effect. And so my goal for patients is if alcohol is still going to be part of your life, ideally we're not having more than 4 drinks per week and not in one sitting. So those have to be broken up. And that's really the maximum. I would prefer it to even be lower, albeit 0 if they're open to it and we're switching in for like mocktails or those sorts of things.
What do you have Danny on right now? No alcohol?
No alcohol. Yeah, we're both
for
on,
3 months, 0 alcohol.
Yes. Yep. And we're both on that. We neither of us drink very much anyway, so it wasn't a difficult switch for us. I will say in another life, and I mean in this life, but in another life and career, I am a sommelier, and so I have a love and affection for wine, but it wasn't a difficult switch for me because it was like if I can do everything in my power to improve, and same for him, then it was like, right, and it's not that long. And so that's a big piece. And then other things are avoiding other environmental toxins. So if we are a huge golfer, research is mixed, but that exposure to the pesticides that are used on golf courses can have an impact on the system. Now, if you're like a weekend warrior golfing and like you're getting like 1 or 2 rounds a weekend, we don't know that to be overly detrimental, but just things to factor in. If we're looking at like, okay, of the things I'm doing, if I'm sauning, if I'm cycling, and I'm golfing, and I'm drinking alcohol, or I'm using nicotine in high amounts, that can be detrimental. Sorry to all my Zen fans out there. I am outing you. The high nicotine intake can have a negative impact on sperm production. And then other recreational...
What about weed?
Yes, other recreational drugs like cannabis, certainly things like cocaine can have a significant impact on sperm motility and that really the maturation process. And part of that, again, is we really think to be more involved in just the inflammation that it can cause. And people are, I think when I say inflammation, it's like a tough concept to grasp. And it is, truthfully, and I totally recognize that. But when I say inflammation, what I try and get people to envision is you're introducing something foreign into your system or something that your body doesn't like or recognizes it. And so the immune system says, this is foreign, this is creepy or crazy, I need to flag it. And in that flagging process, it recruits more immune cells, but in order to do so, it sends out these inflammatory signals. But unfortunately, those inflammatory signals can damage surrounding cells and surrounding areas. And then when we damage those, we then have that send out inflammatory signals to help recruit immune system to help heal. And it becomes this like snowball effect.
So the body's kind of putting all its resources to healing versus optimizing sperm health, baby health, all of that.
Totally. And then also, you know, with that, again, any way we can reduce those toxins is going to help lower the inflammatory load on our system and also allow for other micronutrients, kind of what you were referring to be used preferentially to creating healthy sperm. So I think that's super important. So those are things to kind of like help avoid and minimize. And I think that's super important. And then things to do.
Yeah. What are the things that partners should be doing to get ready? And this is also, again, starting at the 3-month mark. Is this starting for men at the 6-month mark?
I mean, ideally for both partners, 6 months is like the ideal window of time.
But 3 is okay.
But 3 is okay. And the reason I say 6 months is because it takes us, most of us, roughly a month to build a habit, especially if we're consistent with it. So if we're factoring in those 6 months, if the first 1 to 2 were not super consistent, then we're already at the 4-month mark where now it needs to be more serious. So that's where I have the conversation of 6 months, because not everyone's like super inclined to like immediately get going. But all that to say, things to do or foundations of health are a like absolute must. We need to be sleeping. Please sleep. I don't want to hear it that you can live off 4 hours of sleep. Your body absolutely cannot and should not be doing that.
You're speaking directly to me right now.
It's important that we get the sleep and the quantity and quality of sleep that our body needs. And ideally, we're going to bed and waking up at the same time every day. As boring as that is, especially for men, they're lucky. They have a 24-hour rhythm of pretty much all of their hormones. As females, we run more cyclically on a 28 to 30-ish day cycle, depending on the individual. And so that consistency allows your body to know, okay, this is when I'm up, this is when cortisol is made, this is when testosterone is made, and like the sequence kind of follows.
So speaking of sleep for men, do we have a problem with melatonin for men?
So we actually know melatonin both, and that's actually something I think in previous episodes we may or may not have touched on, but supplement-wise, melatonin can be a really powerful antioxidant, actually. And so it can be helpful for both sperm production and or ovaries and egg
men,
production.
because I feel like melatonin gets a lot of flack right now. So for both men and women, you're okay with melatonin?
Yes,
in the
as long as they tolerate it well, because there's certainly the population of people where even in smaller, most of the research is done between 1 and 3 milligrams that we know to be an antioxidant and supportive for sleep architecture. But for some, even that amount can make them feel kind of groggy and not so great in the morning. And so again, kind of that's where we personalize things. I have in my mind a list of things for both men and women, but it really depends on the individual. So one way, and that's super pertinent for men, is testosterone, which I think we've touched on a little bit in our own discussions. But for men who don't know, if you are on testosterone replacement therapy, it does and should decrease sperm production. That's just the way that testosterone replacement therapy works.
So what do men do who are on testosterone and they want to get pregnant?
Yes. So we generally have to cycle them off. So I'll say that with a caveat. There are some protocols, which some patients are on, which is wonderful, that can actually help preserve some aspect of fertility. It's when we use HCG in combination with testosterone. HCG as a medication can be really expensive, so it can be super cost prohibitive to pursue that. But that can be done in combination with the testosterone to help preserve the spermatogenesis process. Most are not doing that. So if we're on just testosterone, we need to come off of testosterone. And generally what we will do, most clinics and most fertility providers will do a course of clomiphene citrate, or Clomid is the medication.
What is that?
So Clomid is a selective estrogen receptor modulator. And yes, I said estrogen. Men, don't panic. We're not giving you estrogen. The reason that it works is Clomid is working essentially on almost telling the brain like, hey, there isn't enough estrogen or hormone in your system. And so it intensifies the FSH and LH signals from the brain down to the testes that help upregulate both testosterone production and sperm production. And what we generally do is we block the conversion of testosterone into estrogen with a medication like anastrozole. It's an aromatization inhibitor, so that men's estrogen isn't climbing sky high. Now, men, yes, you have estrogen. In case you did not know, it's super important that you have estrogen. Don't be afraid of her. She's a friend of yours. She actually helps with sexual function, so you're welcome. She helps with bone health and can help with cognitive function. So she's super important, but they don't need as much as we do, fortunately for them. Although I do wish that they could at least experience one menstrual cycle in their life, but we won't put them through that. So that is generally a course of, we're on TRT, we pause that, we do the clomiphene citrate to kind of help jumpstart that communication process.
Clomiphene citrate has everything in it that you just mentioned. Like
it's just Clomid. So that is generally prescribed with anastrozole. Some providers do that, some don't. It's person dependent.
Do you need it? What does it mean, person dependent?
So it would depend on what someone's estrogen levels are looking at. So that's where you want a really intentional provider who's keeping an eye on those things.
So you want to be doing the male hormone panel and seeing...
Yes, exactly. And so that is a way that we can help with that testosterone production, testosterone production, but also more so the sperm production. So that's super important. Now, for For men, in regards to also doing, so I know we got a little off. We were talking about the exercise. Sorry, we're talking about sleep. Exercise, just like their female partners. Get in the gym with her. Get in the gym.
Yeah.
Do the weightlifting.
Do we want weightlifting?
Please.
Do we want cardio?
We want the
Do we want
weightlifting.
both?
Ideally a mix of both, but we want
But
the
not
weightlifting.
the hot on the balls cardio.
But not the hot on the balls
running's
cardio.
Cool.
Yes.
Anything.
Yes.
Anything but cycling, basically.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so with that, the weightlifting, similar to females, but even for men, can help boost their own testosterone production, which can be wonderful. That testosterone can also help with the sperm production process. So like good things can come from that. So it can be super important. And then following that should be really intentional dietary practices. We're ditching the processed foods, the fatty foods, the high sugar foods. We're being really mindful of getting in high protein, high quality whole foods. Protein, if we're eating animal proteins, a nice good preference of mine, grass-fed, grass-finished, organic whenever possible. And if not, there are plant-based sources, of course.
And we said no fasting for women. For men, does it matter? Can they fast? No fasting? What's best?
Ideally also not in a fasted state.
Okay.
Kind of similar thoughts and processes. Our body is going to be more inclined to doing a better job with its hormone production pathways when we're not in that fasted state.
So can conceive in a fasted state for men, but optimal to not be.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So join your partner in having like a good
Cook
high
your
protein.
partner breakfast.
Yes, in bed.
Yeah.
Ideally.
Yes.
Every day.
Yep.
Of the preconception journey.
And then during and
then
forever
after.
Forward.
Yeah. And then that actually just never stops.
Yeah. Okay, so
That's
we
important.
have limit the heat exposure.
Yes.
As in eliminate heat exposure for 3 months
Yes.
minimum.
Yep.
Stop the biking.
Yep.
Chill on the drinking.
Yep.
If you're on testosterone, there are other options, either including this other thing or switching to something, but we want to do a hormone panel and see where we're at there.
Yes. And you saying hormone panel is a great time to get that blood work done. Ideally, a nice fasted panel first thing in the morning before 9 a.m. is always my preference. Fasting for 10 to 12 hours is best. We'll include in the show notes what that panel could include, but it should be as intentional and pretty much as comprehensive as the female panel. Again, I mentioned estrogen. It's important to look at that because if there's too much aromatization occurring, it can interfere with sperm production as well. And getting too high of estrogen can be a factor. Metabolic things are a factor for health. So all things that can kind of help guide what those next 3 months can look like can really depend on where those hormones are sitting and how other factors of health are. So including that and kind of like what that care is. And then I know I cut you off, but you were recapping.
Well, then high protein.
Yep.
Ideally not fasting, eating breakfast, and working out, weight training, cardio. What about coffee? Does coffee matter? I actually saw something about coffee affecting male fertility.
Okay,
but I don't
interesting.
know. I'll send it to you. It was a small study.
I have not come across that yet. So it's as long as we're not in excess, my goal for most patients is at or under 300 milligrams daily from a caffeine intake standpoint. So just intentional.
I mean, there's
in that
0% chance my partner stops drinking coffee. Like never, not possible.
And I won't either.
Yeah.
Like I
drank it, yeah.
Yeah, I still have it. Or still will continue. And then I think next would really be a good supplement routine.
Yeah.
Like they also, even if we're being super mindful dietary wise, you will naturally and unfortunately have micronutrient deficiencies. It's just the world that we live in today. Things just aren't as nutrient dense. The soil's not as great as it once was. Like all of these factors play in. Digestive plays a role, just meaning like how robust is your digestive system? Are you absorbing those nutrients? Like there's so many things that go into it. And so that supplement routine can help ensure that we're optimizing things.
So tell us, what do you have your partner on, given that you guys are trying to conceive?
Yes. So he's got a wonderful little men's multivitamin, not quite literally little, but
Little men's multi.
Is that insulting? I hope not. We can redo that for the hunky men that maybe we'll have to listen
strong
to.
One.
Big, strong men's multi, only for the alpha of alphas. So a good men's multi, super important. And that's really just a micronutrient standpoint. That's covering our bases. Are we getting some vitamin D in there? Are we getting some zinc? Zinc's super helpful for sperm production and testosterone production, as well as testosterone receptor sensitivity, so how well testosterone talks to that cell. So zinc's a must for men.
Do most
certainly.
men's multivitamins have extra zinc?
Most, yes,
Okay.
or just a sufficient amount in them, yes. And I would say when we're looking for those, and we'll include ones that, you know, we both have loved
we'll
and
link ones
used
we
for
like.
partners, but look for ones that are always GMP certified, as all Beekeepers products are. We're making sure they're third-party tested, has in it what we want it to be, and none of the gunk that we don't. So men's multi, and then we kind of shift into being more focused antioxidant-wise. Similar kind of pattern to some of the things we've touched on for the female-focused supplements is anything we can do that can help harbor a more friendly environment for testosterone production and sperm production is better and going to equate to healthier sperm. So things like royal jelly, incredible for sperm production and sperm health. And yes, I can recognize, you know, some infancy of the research, but there's still great research out there. And it's been really wonderful to see how that can help support the sperm production process. So
royal jelly is one of the few supplements where I've seen a study on male participants, and it was looking at sperm quality, and it looked at DNA maturation.
Yes.
Like it looked across so many different parameters. And so that was one that I had Oliver on every day preconception.
It's an antioxidant, so it's going to help scavenge those kind of reactive oxygen species that are causing inflammation. It has nutrients in it itself, which is wonderful. The 10-HDA in it can help with the communication between the brain and the testes, furthering support that hormonal pathway. It also has ways of helping with the mitochondrial support and energy production. So exactly what you're saying, it hits a lot of boxes, which is really nice. And especially if we're taking like the superfood honey or whatever process or way they like to take it.
A spoon of that every day.
Because it tastes good. And then it's something different rather than just another capsule, which is wonderful. And then we can kind of double down on that, adding in ubiquinol or CoQ10, just further antioxidant support. We can include our wonderful friend propolis, similar reasons, great antioxidant support, especially if you're, I mean, even if you're not traveling, but just as like a daily defense.
Yeah.
And actually, in part of that is including the propolis, especially if you're someone who, when you get sick, it's always like a sore throat or the nasal spray with propolis in it. Because when we get sick, it actually can impact the sperm production during that time period.
Interesting.
And obviously we can't control external factors, but if we can make your system more robust and kind of help flourish the oral mucosa, making sure that the bacteria that's there is happy and healthy, same with the nasal passages, which is propolis is so great at doing. It can help us improve just the microbiome in those areas. Then the less likely we'll get sick, and then the less we have to worry about that. So it's kind of like a nice sidebar, but just an added bonus to that. And then other things just to help power the mitochondria and the motility of sperm are things like acetyl L-carnitine he's also taking. The NAC is already in one of his other supplements, but N-acetylcysteine would be another, just as that precursor to glutathione.
So this is nice. You can share some of your stack.
Yes, we do. We do. We share some of our stack. He's also taking some additional magnesium, again, just more so for supporting that as a micronutrient. Magnesium is wonderful for helping with mitochondrial function, as amongst a million other things that it does. Omega-3 fatty acids, super helpful and important as well. Also a good probiotic. That's kind of a nice, like, in my opinion, simplified routine.
Yeah.
You could, if you really needed to skim it down, a men's multivitamin, omega-3, and like royal jelly, I think would be like a super solid 3 that I know we're checking a lot of boxes. But I don't think, I know my husband's also a naturopathic doctor, but I don't think his stack is ridiculous.
Yeah.
But those are kind of other things that you're worth thinking of.
Okay, amazing. And then any other things to think about, make sure our partner's doing, not doing?
Yes. I want to touch on testing. Aside from blood work, that's really important for the men. So my preference is whenever I'm working with someone fertility-wise, I'm working with both as soon as possible, because while we can be shamed into thinking and feeling that it's us that's the issue, we know, again, statistically, a lot of the times it can be them. So it's important to me that we're evaluating both. And so with that process is a semen analysis. And so men are generally sent to do a semen analysis, inpatient, outpatient, just depends on where they're doing it. Ideally, we're doing 2 samples, 2 to 3 weeks apart, and there needs to be abstinence, so no intercourse or
For 2
ejaculation.
to 3 weeks?
No, for 2.
I was like,
The
this is a hard test.
The abstinence is only for like 48 hours prior
Okay.
to the test.
We can handle that.
Yes, and then 2 to 3 weeks we're doing another test. And the double testing is just in case there's any error in the testing itself, so we can just kind of like double down on the results. We're looking at the quantity of sperm. We're looking at how motile they are. Are we getting progressive motility, meaning not just are they moving, but are they moving straight and in like a linear fashion? That's really important. This is also where we can test for white blood cells in the semen. Because again, as I was just saying, if people get sick or if there's a chronic low-grade infection, high white blood cells can cause a lot of oxidative stress. And so we want to be mindful of whether that's present or not. And so that testing is super important for all those parameters, and we can include some things that you can ask for specifically. It needs to be a complete semen analysis, otherwise it might miss the mark on a few things. So we'll include that in the show notes just so people know what to ask for. There are some at-home test kits. I do not advise on those, and the reason is sperm is really sensitive. It needs to be evaluated and tested as soon as possible. And so that's why doing it in a space where as soon as it's collected, it's passed over to the lab personnel.
So you want to do it at
evaluate.
the doctor's office.
Exactly. So and a lot of fertility clinics, you can pay to go in and have it done without being a patient. So we'll just kind of include different ways that you can kind of troubleshoot that process. So that's really important. Something else that I don't think people know about that I just want to mention is something called sperm chromatin structure assay. SCSA.
What is that? I don't know what that is.
This is a more specialized test for sperm, and it's looking at something called DNA fragmentation. So it's looking at the genetic encoding of the sperm and how healthy the DNA is, for lack of a better word. And the reason why this is important is if there's a high percentage of DNA fragmentation, it can be unfortunately a commonly missed reason for frequent miscarriages, and it's not always evaluated until later in the process. So if you're a couple that's gone through a lot of heartbreak throughout this journey already, and this has not come across your table yet, please ask your doctor about it. If they do not know about it, find someone that does. It's generally something kind of like the semen analysis where a collection is made and then it's immediately tested and looked at. Super important to look at that. And also something that royal jelly can help with is that DNA fragmentation piece, which is really neat. So
for the DNA fragmentation, is that something you test? You probably test it right away with all your patients, but or is it more like if you're having a month or two of issues?
Yes, it's not always immediately done from my perspective, but it is always on the docket of, especially if there's been, for me, I don't want to say a red flag, but a flag for it is if there's been frequent miscarriages, then it's something that I want to immediately look at and investigate, especially if he hasn't really been part of the conversation yet, because it's important to me that we're evaluating that, because again, it's something that can be missed. It's not commonly tested. It's not in a semen analysis traditionally. Unfortunately, I'm hoping it will get there.
It's crazy that it's not.
Yeah, and it's something that we can get a lot of really useful information from. So I think that's super important to also include, and not something, again, that's commonly talked about.
Yeah.
I think that would really be the biggest kind of other piece. But I think what I really want people to know and take away from this is that men are a big piece of the equation. And I want, whether it's them themselves listening to it or their female partners, just to help educate them on the role that they can play, because their health directly impacts the health of their sperm, how motile the sperm is, how healthy the sperm is, how little DNA fragmentation that sperm has, which can increase the chances of pregnancy, can improve the health of pregnancy, can improve and reduce the chances that baby has a predisposition to things like diabetes, other things like autism spectrum disorder, and just other factors of health that can be impacted from the sperm specifically. So they play a big role, and I don't think we're talking about it enough.
No, we're not. We should create our own panel, so
absolutely,
that people know what to ask for, whether they take it to their doctor or are doing something like that. But just sort of off the cuff, and we'll create one and share it so that people have that resource. Off the cuff, what are the go-to tests that you want to run for a guy? So you mentioned the 2 sperm tests.
Yes.
What else?
So if we're talking about blood work specifically, I need and want to look at LH and FSH. LH is luteinizing hormone. It's going to help drive more of the testosterone production. It's the communication from the brain to the testes. FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, both the same in females, just different function in men. It's going to help drive the sperm production. I want to know how those are sitting, because I want to know, is the brain sending enough of a signal and the testes just aren't responding, or is the brain not sending the signal and we have a problem higher up? In addition to those, I always like to screen for something called a prolactinoma. Sounds scary, it's not that scary. It's a benign growth in the brain that secretes prolactin. So non-cancerous, but problematic, because that prolactin secretion can interfere with other hormones and other hormone production, which then can further the difficulty for fertility, both for men and women. So I do include that in both, but for men, I think it gets missed commonly. And then from there, a kind of more complete hormone panel is going to be testosterone. I need to know your free and total testosterone with your sex hormone binding globulin measurement. Total includes testosterone. I like to think of it as testosterone rides on a little school bus in your bloodstream. That school bus is sex hormone binding globulin. It's just what carries it around. The testosterone that's on the bus is not readily available for our cells. It's kind of like it's stuck on the bus. It just goes on by. The testosterone that gets off of the bus is the free testosterone. And that free testosterone is what your body can actually make use of, both for men and women. So it's important that we have enough total testosterone, but also enough free testosterone that your body can actually do meaningful things with. And then the measurement of the sex hormone binding globulin, again, as that carrier protein, is helpful for me. And then looking at your estrogen levels, so your estradiol and estrone estrogen levels in your bloodstream. And then I also like to look for just metabolic factors of health. Are we insulin resistant? How is our hemoglobin A1C measurement? How's our cholesterol levels? I like to look at the size and shape of cholesterol levels, which we will touch on and have touched on in previous episodes. And we'll include, of course, on the show notes too, of just getting a really good understanding of, are there other areas metabolically that are slowing things down that could use some love and improvement? Because I like to think of it, if we're insulin resistant and not showing up in your blood work, so are the testes. They are struggling to make use of the glucose in the bloodstream because they are also insulin resistant. So it's not just impacting your liver or your kidneys or your muscles, it's impacting every cell in your body, and correcting that can have a really positive impact on sperm production as well as hormone production too.
How would you correct that?
Handful of different things. Dietary and lifestyle are generally the first two stops or places to go, especially if we're not exercising, especially if we're not weight training. And dietary wise, if we're not getting in enough protein, the difficulty with a lack of protein, and especially a lack of fiber in the diet, is it allows for more swings in our blood sugar throughout the day. And as we spike more, we also crash more. And that crash is really when we can get more cravings. Our brain recognizes a drop in blood sugar, and it's very smart. It knows to crave and make us yearn for the things that will bring our blood sugar back up. Whereas if we have a more balanced diet that has enough fiber and protein in it, it's going to mitigate those spikes throughout the day. So we're going to have like little bumps. Always will have a rise in blood sugar. We should, but it should be nominal, and we shouldn't feel those swings. And so those dietary changes can have a really positive impact. And then if and when needed, that's when we can also reach for medications and or supplements that are natural alternatives to things like metformin. So think of things like berberine that can have a similar impact on improving insulin sensitivity too. So lots of different tools we can lean on to.
Berberine, that's one of the ones you're not supposed to take that as a woman as you're trying, right?
Yes, yes. And especially during pregnancy, we know that it can be impactful in a negative way for baby and crossing the placenta. So that's one that, yes, we shy away from.
So don't share that stack.
Yes, yeah, that stack you can keep on your own. Exactly. Yeah. So I think those would be, ways of approaching that and helping adjust that.
Amazing.
Cool.
I love this episode. I'm so excited for this to be a resource and guide.
Me too.
For everyone out there.
Yeah.
I'm learning stuff that I'm going to be taking into my next pregnancy for sure.
Great. So I love that.
Thank you for this.
You're welcome. I am excited for everyone to have those resources in the show notes. Replay this, re-listen to it, send it, share it. Please get this out there because more people need to know. They have a really big impact on our overall health. And I'm just excited for them to know and for us to have healthier pregnancies and healthier babies. Men, it's up to you.